All right, so we're here in the Comanche National Grassland in southeast Colorado, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about different lichen forms. So there are about 4 lichen forms, and they all look quite different, and that's what defines them. But I want you to keep in mind that this isn't a systematic distinction. So in other words, they're not grouped by genus or species into these forms. Any genus can have any type of these forms. It's really just something to help you classify them in your head. It helps to learn. And in some places you have a lot more of one type of thing than another. So right here in the Comanche, we have a lot of crustose lichens. So I've got a rock with a couple different things on here. And you can see all these crusts attached to the rock. So they're quite flat and add pressed to the surface. But the thing that really defines a crustose lichen is that you can't separate it from its substrate, and it doesn't have a lower cortex. So if I was going to try to peel this guy off, it would basically just crumble. So when we're collecting these things in the field, you want to use a rock chisel so you can get the entire piece of rock along with the lichen. So, crust. We have kind of an interesting form right here called Squamulis, and this one is a little bit more unusual. You don't see it quite as much. But these little squamules are somewhere in between one of the forms called Folios and the crust. So it kind of looks like a crust, but you can separate it from its surface, and it does have a lower cortex. So here's an example of Squamulis. Another type is Folios, and it's called that because it's kind of like if you were to grab a leaf and just slap it to a tree. Like if you are driving along the highway and you see lichens on the trees, those are usually Folios lichens. So it's kind of like you just slapped a piece of lichen onto a tree. So it has a lower cortex. You can separate it from its substrate. And here's an example of that right here. So you can see it kind of looks like a crust from the top, but if I turn the rock over, you can see how you could separate that from the surface. It has a lower cortex. And what we don't have an example of here is Frita Coast, which is kind of like, pretend this is a lichen. They basically look like a little bush or a tree. It's kind of 3D, and you can separate it from its substrate, and it's not add pressed to the surface. And sometimes they're pendant, so you can get, so in Colorado, for instance, you can see a lot of lichens hanging from branches. That would be an example of a Frita Coast lichen.
And to add to Carly's excellent demonstration,
We can cut it and then we can come
Frita Coast lichens do not have an upper cortex that is differentiable from the lower cortex. So one cortex, and it looks all the same 3-dimensionally.